Hey everyone, it's FLAK Fire. As Battlefield 2042 shambles into 2022, it seems like the light at the end of the tunnel just keeps getting further and further away. Developers just announced the scoreboard has been bumped to March, and the first season of content for the game won't arrive until summer. Fans can only hope that DICE and EA are hard at work behind the scenes, and maybe you're enjoying the game. That's great. It hasn't stopped a noticeable exodus from the player base and discontent among fans. Toxicity is rampant in the community, with some lashing out at developers and even each other. It's not a pretty sight. While we are getting updates to the game, a PR crisis and a lack of fan confidence has Battlefield 2042 foundering. I said this a lot leading up to the game's release, but in today's gaming environment, you get one shot to make your game stick. If it's not up to snuff, it's basically done. I take no pleasure in being correct, but if developers truly want to bring Battlefield 2042 back from the brink, DICE needs to consider the nuclear option, effectively killing and then re-releasing Battlefield 2042. Now, that might seem drastic, especially when you really break it down. Battlefield 2042 isn't that problematic. Yes, it has some stability issues, and yes, some developer decisions were objectively bad. With enough time and effort, those issues can be remedied relatively easily, but it's much more difficult to rebuild DICE's relationship with the community and change public opinion on Battlefield 2042. At this point, I think an overhaul and re-release of the game is the best shot at salvaging it. But what would a reworked Battlefield 2042 look like? And what do DICE and EA need to change to make the game successful? That's what we're talking about here today. So, first and foremost, Battlefield 2042 needs to abandon specialists. This is the most common complaint that I see regarding the game, and it is a core reason that it really doesn't feel like a Battlefield title. Traditional gameplay is built on the back of simple class concepts, and specialists dilute and complicate that far too much. Integrating specialists into a new class and weapon system would drastically improve gameplay and put it in the same vein as Battlefield 3. This could also be used to solve lingering issues with team identification. I think a big concern for EA and DICE when it comes to all of this specialist stuff is keeping them for cosmetic reasons and being able to sell cosmetic content. I understand that, but if nobody is playing the game, then no one is buying cosmetics. Keeping the characters isn't really an issue with the proposed format that I put together here, but changing the way they function would go a long way in placating the community. It's kind of a win-win, in my opinion. This little graphic here is just an example, so leave me your thoughts in the comments on this kind of organization. People on Twitter liked it, but I would love to hear from you. DICE did say that they do have a team analyzing specialists as we speak, so that indicates they're open to some big ideas and some significant changes might be on the way. Second, Battlefield 2042 needs to pivot away from 128 players. That might be an unpopular sentiment, but I appreciate DICE tried to do something different. Yet I also appreciate that I don't think it really works. The developer's own research from years ago came to those same conclusions, that more doesn't always equal better. 128 players, in my opinion, it's just too chaotic. It does not produce enjoyable gameplay. This is due in part to the vast open spaces on the gigantic maps and the excessive amount of vehicles. A rebooted version of Battlefield 2042 should be built around the traditional 64-player count. This should create tighter combat, more predictability, and it would also put less strain on systems already struggling to hit reasonable frame rates. In addition to smaller game modes, DICE really needs to vary its map design. It all kind of boils down right now to capture points with large open spaces between them, and the result of this is predominantly long-range combat. The sheer number of vehicles compounds this problem by making quick work of anyone who dares exit the very limited cover. Moving between objectives without a vehicle is also tedious, and many players would at that point just simply prefer to respawn. New or reworked maps should take pages from previous Battlefield games and limit vehicles in some instances, right? We think about Battlefield 1, Battlefield 5, both of these took this approach and were all the better for it. Maps like Fort de Vaux or Rotterdam really allowed infantry combat to shine, and it created greater variety to gameplay. You might also remember that Battlefield 5 actually had a grind mode that basically metrified maps. I think it's incredibly telling that with over 100 hours in Battlefield 2042, I still don't feel like I can give an informed opinion on gunplay in the game, primarily because I spend most of my time trying to destroy vehicles or sniping, and there's really no impetus for me to try and do anything else. Fourth, DICE and EA need to bring back a bunch of those so-called legacy features. Voice chat and a scoreboard are on the way, but there is a lot more that would significantly improve the experience. Specifically, Battlefield 2042 needs a server browser, and it also needs changes to the way it handles matchmaking. Implementing a server browser gives players more choice. Maybe they want to play with more than just a squad of friends. Maybe they want to play on a fully populated server, or maybe they're just tired of playing Hourglass. I don't know. But giving the players the choice improves their experience. Similarly, the way Battlefield 2042 handles matchmaking is also detrimental to team play. You may not have noticed, but lobbies aren't necessarily consistent match to match. You can wind up shuffled into different squads, teams, or even servers based on need. If you had a great match with a group, there is no guarantee you can continue with the same squad in the next game, and that is a source of frustration for many players, and it makes it very difficult to learn to work together as a squad. In past titles, I've made many friends working together in a string of games, so it's really sad for me to see that gone. Similarly, bringing back the rent-to-server program or platoons would also be a smart move, as it would create a space for communities to rebuild themselves. Next, I mentioned earlier that Battlefield 2042 has a PR problem. DICE and EA have now laid out a plan for integrating community feedback and making it visible, but this isn't really new to the franchise, and at this point it isn't enough. Battlefield 2042 needs the return of the community test environment. Now, I've seen the CTE referred to as a PR stunt, and yes, that's what it largely is. It takes additional resources to run, and while the data gathered is certainly valuable, it's not going to result in earth-shattering changes, but frankly, it doesn't need to. A growing part of the Battlefield community has little faith in developers and does not feel a connection to Battlefield 2042. Getting them involved with the CTE has many positive effects, like giving them a personal connection to the title, early access to content, and making them feel closer to the development team. The CTE has the added benefit of increasing developer transparency, since players can see the content evolve in real time. Thankfully, DICE already sort of have a rough framework in place with Portal, which could be used to test things like maps, modes, and other changes. Sixth, if Battlefield 2042 gets a re-release, it needs clear narrative direction and tone. Everything in the game right now kind of feels disjointed, and it struggles against itself seemingly at every turn. Marketing material paints this very dark, bleak picture of economic and natural disasters, while in the actual game it's kind of juxtaposed. We've got specialists sounding ridiculous, talking about pulling hammies while killing dozens of enemies, right? The lack of a single-player campaign also made it more difficult for players to relate to and understand the world of Battlefield 2042, and I think the cracks with that are really starting to show. Thankfully, Battlefield now has Marcus Leto at the helm of establishing the game's narrative. The creator of Halo's Master Chief will have his hands full trying to make sense of things, and, I would love to see things like a codex or at least some more story woven into the game's presentation. Lastly, from a marketing standpoint, Battlefield 2042 needs to shed its skin of everything visually associated with the game's launch. Just clean slate. The color scheme and cover art all need to go. We need to get a new end-of-round screen. I think that would be a nice touch. DICE did a decent job of this previously with Battlefield 5's Pacific expansion, and it did help signal a new direction for the game. Similarly, I think new music is also a must, as the game's initial soundtrack was not well received. Give us something exciting and driven instead of this kind of avant-garde kind of stuff. And you might say that this is too much to do by summer. I'll admit, you're probably right. This is 100% for me a pipe dream. However, as EA CEO Andrew Wilson said in the last earnings call, DICE has experience rebuilding at the core and re-engaging with the community. They've gotten quite adept at reinventing games after questionable decisions and repurposing assets in valuable ways. For example, a lot of content from Battlefield 5's canned competitive mode wound up in the core game to its benefit. DICE have said that they're going to listen to the community as they redefine Battlefield 2042. This is just my 2 cents here. I really hope that developers can turn the game around, and by summer, it's going to take a strong comeback to pull players back in. I will say that given the time and resources, I do believe that DICE can do it, but they need clear leadership and direction. My biggest concern here is EA's commitment. We've seen them balk at a re-release with Anthem and consign the game to the bin. I sincerely hope that that fate doesn't befall Battlefield 2042, but at this point, I think we know that bottom line is king. EA isn't in the business of losing money, and if the forecast for Battlefield 2042 remains bleak, I would say that it's done. I've said this before as well, but EA should view Battlefield 2042 as an opportunity to build trust in the community. The right decisions right now can completely change the trajectory of the game. I want to make that clear, but the bad ones might put the franchise on ice, Medal of Honor style. I am curious what you think of all of this, though. Does Battlefield 2042 need a re-release? Do you think it just needs a few tweaks? If you've left the game, what would bring you back to Battlefield 2042? Tell me down below in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts on this. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If not, a dislike. Make sure to subscribe. Tap the bell so you get updates on all future Battlefield content. If you want to continue the conversation on social media, you can find links to my Twitter, Facebook, etc. down in the video description. I will also say that, hey, if you want to support the channel, check out some of our awesome sponsors as well, or you can keep your money and share this video. As always, thanks for watching.